You eliminate 99% of the attack surface to a single moment in time, which is the beginning. And when you do that, would-be attackers are forced to take risks and make mistakes. When someone is planning on doing election fraud, this doesn't mean that it's impossible for them to do it, but it narrows the window so much that they are likely going to mess up. And when they mess up, you catch them.
We may or may not have been trying to make this interview work for 2 months. And I don't know what it is, but a lot of things just kept getting in the way, including a very, very frustrating computer problem on the day that we were supposed to meet last time. But this is Bitcoin Audible, by the way. I am Guy Swan, the guy who's read more about Bitcoin than anybody else you know. We've got a fantastic conversation today. This is such a cool story. And we have Carlos on the show today, who has, I think, fundamentally changed the nature of elections in Guatemala and the ability to protect and ensure election data from the moment it is tallied forward. And it is using Bitcoin. And no, this is not voting on the blockchain. This is not an ID system. This is not NFTs. Trust me, this is not what you probably are imagining first in your head. This is awesome. This is using Bitcoin as a time chain to prove the immutability of a record. Does not mean that the record is true. It doesn't mean anything of the sort. But what better to apply this to and to prove the use case and the utility of Bitcoin if it can secure an election result so that that data has integrity moving forward and it cannot be altered in retrospect. In an age of fake everything, that is an insanely important utility, and it's only going to get more important every single year. And so I desperately wanted to talk to Carlos on this show so he could tell his story. He could tell what they built and what they did and how it may very well have changed the course of history in Guatemala, and why he's trying to do the same thing here in the US. It may seem like a crazy thing to say, but listen to this episode before you decide. This episode is brought to you by Swan Bitcoin, the place to buy Bitcoin, to plug your life into Bitcoin. If you're getting started, please just go to swanbitcoin.com/guy, and you will save yourself like 90% of the problems that people usually have first getting into crypto. Then you'll solve 90% of the remaining problems by getting a cold card hardware wallet from CoinKite, which is also sponsoring this show. And understand, this isn't because they're just people who reach out to me. This is because I use these services, I use these tools, and I recommend them to people with or without a sponsorship because I think they are valuable. Buy your Bitcoin on Swan, keep it safe with the cold card. Links, details, and a discount code right in the show notes. And with that, it's time to get into today's chat with Carlos on immutable democracy. Dude, Carlos, how's it going, boss? How you doing, man?
I'm doing well, Guy. It's good to be here. Finally.
Hell yeah, finally. It only took like 7 tries. That's not too bad. That's not too bad considering.
I'm sure others have had worse.
Oh, yeah. Just generally, what you been up to, man? I haven't talked to you since BitBlock Boom. How are things?
Good. Just excited about the possibility of bringing our solution and our technology to the U.S. elections in November. So it's looking like it's not just a dream. It's potentially going to happen.
Things are moving. Oh my God.
Well, it's a probabilities problem. There are 3,000 opportunities to do this. So even if it's less than 1%, I mean, multiply that by 3,000. My goal is one place, And I figure if there are over 3,000 election authorities in the United States that could do this, what are the odds of one of them being a Bitcoiner?
Yeah. I mean, it's pretty good. I think you got those odds, actually. Are you targeting any place in particular, or are you just kind of like casting a net and seeing what happens?
My strategy is go on every single podcast and also reach out to every single Bitcoin meetup in the great USA and just say, we have this documentary, why don't you show it? And then I'll stream in for Q&A. And so far I've done 3 of those with Bitcoin meetups. And it's funny because I don't know if we're already going into it, and if you want to do any back stuff or any background or
fill
context.
This in and then we'll get there. Fill this in, then we'll get there.
So
we'll tease it.
Every time I talk to Bitcoin meetups, it's hard sell to get invited because they're like, elections. It's like everyone wants to avoid.
Gives a shit about voting.
Democracy is for statist cucks, right? But I just a consistent message of this is not about democracy. This is about Bitcoin. This is about exposing people who couldn't care, less about what obsesses us with a completely tangential, different touch point that. My experience is it penetrates the FUD that has grown around the brain over 15 years of just nonstop propaganda against Bitcoin through money. And I've increasingly thought, it's probably good that people get so defensive about money that they fight off anyone that wants to talk to them about it because it's money. And it might even be a natural thing, not just a Bitcoin and the FUD thing. But when you're talking about democracy and voting systems and just truth, right? Like, how do we know whether or not something happened? That, it's a different ballgame, right?
Yeah.
And so I'm excited. And every time I've bet on Bitcoiners, I've been surprised with the results, usually in a very positive way. So
usually in a positive way. That's good.
It's where we are a weird bunch, that's for sure. So
oh, that shit's the truth.
Some of my favorite people and some people I would rather do without.
Some of my favorite people in Bitcoin are the weirdest ones. Like just bizarre people.
Well, it's not about weird. It's more of like there's some folks that are either spooks or just
Oh, there's some spooks for sure.
Mentally unstable people that it's just not.
That's weird is my polite word for that.
But I can do mentally unstable. I just can't do like just liars and cheats and
yeah, we got a couple of those.
Yeah, it's a good filter. Most people are awesome, but just always don't trust verify. Right? It's always better. And I will say, going through this process, everyone has their filters up. I guess I look like a spook, and when I start talking about this, they're like, definitely a spook.
I had you for a fed the first minute we started talking, just right out the gate.
I mean, you're a perfect example, right? I mean, it took how long for this to happen? It's like I guess I finally passed the test, the CAPTCHA.
Man, that guy's full of shit. That's just a robot. So, dude, why don't we lay this out for anybody who doesn't know? Tell me the story again. I'm embarrassed. I still haven't even watched the documentary. I've got it saved. I'm not even shitting you. It is in my list. I think it's like 5th down now of the stuff I've been meaning to go through. And I was like, I'm definitely going to get it before we get on the show. And then we kept having problems and I never actually went back to the freaking movie. So why don't you give me the rundown as if you're telling me for the first time?
Sure. So my name is Carlos Torriello. I'm known as Carlino. I'm talking to you from Guatemala City. To those that don't know where that is, it's in North America, specifically in the region of Central America, a good 14 degrees above the equator, so not South America. And Guatemala is, so when you look south, there's a border, that's Mexico. And then if you keep going south, there's another border, and that's Guatemala, right? So it's just like, it's like the neighbor right across the street from the other guy, right?
You're on the next cul-de-sac over.
Right before El Salvador. So we are right next door to El Salvador. And, Central America is a very peculiar region. We are kind of the Balkans of the Americas, right? It's the smallest swath of land with the greatest number of countries and borders and bureaucracies, right? So it takes longer to import food between Guatemala and El Salvador, who are essentially brothers and sisters of the same culture, everything. It takes us 2 days to get food across the border, and yet between France and Germany, who have killed each other like thousands of times, like it'll take you 0 time to cross the border. Yeah. So yeah, I mean, Central America is born and raised, and I got the chance to study in a bilingual school and learn English from a bunch of United Statesian people is what we call you guys, right? It's like they're not Americans because we are also Americans, right? Central Americans. They are United Statesians and also a bunch of Canadians, and then also privileged to been able to go to school in the States. I graduated from North Carolina, Chapel Hill, did economics and entrepreneurship. Graduated 2009. And definitely wasn't covering Austrian economics in 2009, unfortunately, and definitely not covering Satoshi Nakamoto. Terrible time to graduate. Moved back home and just have been working in and around Central America for 15 years. And I was doing that, helping my dad with a family business that he had started over 30 years ago. That fed me and educated me, and excited to work with my dad, because if you ever get a chance to work with your family, I mean, I can't imagine a better mentor than your dad or someone like close to you, right? So going through that process, and it was a metal constructions business that he had, and learning a bunch of things, doing some really gnarly engineering, building some of the biggest roofs building some of the biggest roofs in Central America, like technically the biggest roof span in all Central America was a project that we built. Mega churches and coal depots. And so doing that, all of a sudden one day we read the newspaper and find out that 2 out of our 3 companies in our business, our family enterprise, were added to the OFAC list, and found out reading the newspaper, and
oh my God,
very quickly realized the value of censorship-resistant money and the weaponization of the dollar being very real. No innocent until proven guilty. Just overnight, a company that has been employing over 150 people for 30 years, building tons of stuff in all over Central America. All of our bank assets were frozen. We had cash in the bank, but they wouldn't cash our checks, and they wouldn't say why. And it's just like, you're on this list. And finally able to talk to some authorities in the central bank that told us, look, legally speaking, in Guatemala, nothing has happened. You haven't committed a crime. There's no process against you. But because you're on this list, the United States Treasury Department, and specifically the Office of Foreign Asset Control, tells us that if we move 1 cent of your accounts, then we lose our SWIFT license. And therefore, if our bank loses our SWIFT license, then the bank goes into a bank run. And if the bank goes into a bank run because of fractional reserve banking, the entire country goes into a bank run, and we collapse the Guatemalan economy. So your company just isn't that important, and our constitution doesn't matter, right? We are living under the thumb of the U.S. empire. And so anyway, that started a process that was incredibly...
what do you even do? What do you even do?
Good question. I had a buddy that from school that went to the State Department. I reached out to him, and so I was like, dude, like, what do I do? And he was like, well, I know that they don't want to have the wrong people in that list, so I'm sure that there's a process. And the process was, here's an email, and so it's like hello at OFAC or something .treasury, and
Dear
we just
God.
sent an email. Just a blanket email saying, hello, we are so-and-so. We are the owners of companies XY who were added to this list. We can't use our money, and the banks locally offer no guidance. What do we do? And about 30 days later, they responded saying, please provide 15 years worth of audited financial statements. And so we're like, well, we don't really do that. But I guess if we want to survive, we have to spend the next 2 months building 15 years worth of financial experience. And
holy crap.
Did that, and so sent it, and it from the time when we were added to the list to the 2 months later we sent our information, and a total of 24 months went by before we got a letter saying, hello, you are no longer on the list. The United States Treasury Department reminds you that you can be added back on the list at any time. So that was it.
Dude.
And so
holy crap.
That it's a scarlet letter when you're added to the OFAC list. I mean, literally Kim Jong-un and Osama bin Laden are on that list. And
was there ever explanation as to why or how?
Not really like a direct explanation. The newspaper article that we read, which may have been published by a journalist that had some kind of intel, was describing that this lady known as the Queen of the South, the La Reina del Sur, there's a Netflix series about her, was chased, this drug kingpin, narcotics, whatever, and that essentially they created this web of trust around this person. And so anyone that had ever had anything to do with this person, they put it, some kind of large language model or whatever to figure out what this person did, and all of her associates. And it turned out that like
at some point you built a roof for somebody.
What we think it was, although we never had confirmation, was someone that worked for her. His wife was the friend of one of our investors from 6 years prior, and she showed up to a board meeting and signed a document, and we never saw or heard from her again. And then 6 years later, that was enough to just get us into this vortex, right? So
dude,
it's there was literally nothing we could have done to foresee this. I mean, unless you're the FBI and you're screening every single person that's coming in. I mean, it's just,
I was about to say, how would you even go that deep? I mean, like, I don't know.
I mean, that investor lied to us. They presented a story as to why they were investing with us, and so after the fact, we were able to find out. So it wasn't really their money; they were just a front. But it's like, how would I know? It's like some old. No, we were raising money
from their account.
Like the bank is supposed to be doing this. I mean, they're the ones that are supposed to be doing this. We got a bank transfer. So anyway, it just revealed that it's all bullshit. It's all bad for you. Individual citizens are at the mercy of the state. Capitalism doesn't work, and fiat is at the heart of it all, right? And so, we've spent over 4 or 5, actually like 6 years trying to still build that business back up, and failed still. So just went further into debt. All the while, every competitor is going around town saying, "Oh, they're on the same list as Bin Laden. Like you shouldn't trust them." It's like, wait, so 30 years worth of good, honest, hard work doesn't, like, just some person publishes something in the newspaper and you forget 30 years worth of hard work. And it's like, well, yeah, that's what the world's become, right? And so, throughout that time, we have a voting system here in Guatemala that every 4 years we have elections. And it's a really interesting voting system in that it is the product of our last revolution. Guatemala's last revolution is from 1982. And we finally got rid of the military juntas that were sponsored by, basically we had a series of military juntas of dudes that were taught at the School of the Americas. For those that don't know what that is, Google it. But anyway, finally in 1982, we got rid of them, and we decided to actually have democracy, because we had 30 years of the cops and the military kind of, you show up to vote and there's a dude saying like, well, so who do you want to vote for? And then the votes kind of disappear into the police station, and oh, surprise, the military leader won, right? So we had that for 30 years between 1950 and 1980. And there was a last straw in 1980 when they like murdered a guy. Like they literally sent 2 choppers after him and machine gunned him in the streets, because he was going to win even with the fraud. And so people just had enough. We revolted. We got rid of that system and replaced it with our current constitution, which at the heart of it is this election authority that oversees the entire country. And the guy that designed it, I consider this kind of Satoshi Nakamoto figure. His name was Arturo Gerbrucher. He is this constitutional lawyer at 80 some odd years old at this point. At the end of his life, all he wants to do is leave a legacy. And his legacy is like, I want to create the best voting system that humanity can with the tools we got in 1982 or whatever. Mm-hmm. And he, it was at the perfect time where the IBM through the USAID sent this giant mainframe computer that could do a bunch of computing for the election system, but it couldn't do e-voting yet. So it was still like paper-based, but the tabulation of the paper individual ballots could happen with machines, so that we could know the results quickly, so that we could communicate it to the press and nationally, right? So you could avoid, the slowness of paper and someone coming out saying, I won, just because, we're still computing the results. It could take a while. And so we have this system where it's paper-based, the computing happens quickly, but it's also empowering the citizens. So instead of you show up and there's a cop or a military dude giving your ballot, the idea was, let's empower the citizenry. And so we create this decentralized network of voting tables where you need to have 3 citizens minimum to a voting table, usually 5, that are just neighbors from their community. And each one is volunteers into this kind of like volunteer conscripted citizen army, where you're like, I want to defend the vote of my neighbors. You show up, you enlist, and they assign you to a voting table. And when you show up, you get all the tools inside a box, and registered voters just get assigned, out of geography to your table. And so it's literally neighbors are the ones in control of their paper ballots, right? What keeps them honest is all political parties competing in the election are allowed to send witnesses that oversee the entire thing. So you have your box, you sit down on a table, the witnesses are right behind you all day. If you do anything wrong, the cops are outside and you can get thrown in jail. And people just show up. You give them their ballot. Well, you check their ID, make sure that they're assigned to that voting table. You ask them to show you their hands, because the way Arturo Gebruchen corrected the double spend problem, because it's analog, it's very cheap to correct the double spend problem. After you vote, we have indelible ink and we just paint your finger, right? And so if you magically messed up the voting rolls and assigned yourself to 10 different voting tables, well, they'll paint you. And even though you're there on the list, they won't give you ballots if your fingers have any kind of ink on them, right? And so people are told, like, don't put shit on your fingers. Like, just like, that's all you need to do. ID yourself, you get your ballots, and then like the citizen individually, that the table has these slots where you dump in your paper ballots. So as a volunteer, I volunteered in 2011, 2015, so I'm a voting table army, veteran twice. And I handle it. I prepare everything. I give it to the citizen, and then the citizen deposits the vote himself. So I never touch the vote once, it's cast, right? It's like literally the citizen is the one that does it. And right behind me, there's, a bunch of people making sure that that's what happens. And of course, that's what happens. Is the beautiful thing is because it's around 400 citizens to a table out of, this past year in 2023, there were 9 million registered voters. It turns into about 25,000 voting tables. So when you do the math, it's around 4 people per voting table on average. So that's 100,000 people are this like citizen army that's conscripted to do this. And then the voting, like the witnesses from the political parties, on average, I think it's like another 4 or 5. So it's another 100,000 people that are representing, the political parties. And so you've got at least 200,000 people, and some estimates it's upwards of 300,000. And 9.2 million registered voters out of a population of 18 million. And so it's like
that's a strong ratio. That is crazy. Yeah.
And then in 2023, obviously abstentionism, people that don't vote is still, it's most of the votes. So 4.2 million people bothered to show up to vote. And there were over 200,000 people at the tables protecting those votes. So out of every vote that was cast in the system, there were over 200,000 people there present overseeing it. So that's about 5% of the voting system is physically present to make sure that it happens well.
That's crazy.
So that's why it's integrity.
That's crazy. Yeah.
It's like, that's a lot of eyeballs.
That's hard to cheat. Yeah.
Hard to cheat. It's decentralized and it's awesome. And it's why I fell in love with it, right? It's like, I participated in this. I like drag friends into it so that we can man more tables. And of course, my calling is not only is this cool because I'm crazy like that. I think that stuff like this is cool. These are cool problems. But then also it's like if we don't want our votes stolen, Guatemala has this beautiful ability to just all we need to do to make sure that our votes aren't stolen is to just show up. And they can't keep us from it because it's ours, right? So our revolution in the 80s, what it proved to us is this is ours, and all we need to do is make sure they don't take it from us. Of course, over the past 40 years, people have kind of just fallen asleep on liberty and have forgotten that there's the price of freedom is eternal vigilance. And the way we do this is every 4 years you just show up, right? And so I fell in love with the process. I was kind of exposed to Bitcoin, but I'm going through this saga with my family's business, essentially going under, trying to help my dad. He's having health issues. I was like, I'm blessed in that he made it through because there was a one point where he almost died. I was, suicidal at one point because I'm just like, what's the point? It's like we were doing everything right and still we lost everything. But anyway, I'm going through this voting process while all this is happening, and I'm starting to get exposed to Bitcoin. And I realize when I'm at my voting table, it's like, this is kind of like Bitcoin. Like voting systems are a consensus algorithm, right? It's no matter what voting system you have, it's just this some kind of wonky way that human beings have to, at the end of the day, reach some type of decision or consensus, right?
Man, if we could have 5% of Bitcoiners running nodes. oh, mess with me. Come on, bitch.
Well, that's where you realize it goes both ways, right? Of just like realizing if we can get to the point where we've got about 5% of all humanity running nodes, like, come and take it, right? Like that's
oh yeah.
And so I realized, wow, like every single voting table is kind of like a mining node, right? Where the individual ballots are transactions. They're deposited into this bag, and this bag is actually a coin join. And so the voting table volunteers at the table, like organizing everything, or maybe you would even call them like coin join coordinators. They're just receiving everyone's ballots and they're doing the work. They grab all, 200, 300, however many votes showed up, and they assigned them to each party, literally by taking out each vote in front of the witnesses, saying, all right, Bob, Frank, Lisa, and legally, the only moment where political parties can fight it for the ballots is that moment, right? So there is no other legal opportunity for political parties to fight for their ballots unless they are there. So it just means the voting day becomes the only moment where you have that opportunity to disagree and to create to issues. And if you say, hey, that's not for Lisa, that's for Bob, then as like the miner, as the CoinJoin coordinator, I can say, well, you know what? We're not going to agree. I'm going to cast it for Bob, but here's like you get a form and you get to say there is one vote that was assigned to Bob, but I think it was Lisa's. And so we just take that vote, we put it in a separate bag that's contested votes, but on the document it's Bob's. And so we just say now we kick that up to the next level where if the difference between Lisa and Bob is so small that contested vote is material, then we'll
then look at it. Yeah.
But if it's not, then who cares, right? And so anyway, that happens, and this document gets created, which is a public. It's like the soul of Guatemalan democracy is in this document. It's known as document number 4, because we have the system has several numbered documents, and the main one, that the result of the voting table, is document number 4, and what it contains is how the votes that were assigned to that table, maximum of about 400 to 500, how they are distributed amongst all the parties competing in the election. And then it has the signature by the mining nodes, the voting table volunteers, plus the signature of the validating nodes, the political party witnesses who were there saying, yes, this is what happened. And you even have the tally of how many contested votes there are, right? So it's just like, we agree that this is what happened, right? People all 8 of us or whatever. And because the political parties are several, then the competing, their competing influence is what is keeping the work honest, right? Because you have Bob, Bob sent a guy, Lisa sent another dude, and Hank sent, and so there's several people, and so they're making sure that the citizen isn't just giving all the votes to Bob, right? It's that's what keeps it honest, but it requires 5% of the population to mobilize that one day, right? And this document is made public, right? And it is literally born public because it is crafted by the citizens, and so it is by nature public. And so when the internet kind of took off, then the authorities decided to use the internet to start publishing these documents and, of course, their tallies in what they call a preliminary results website, which is just basically saying, hey, we did the compute so that we can give we can give a sense of where things are at, so that we take away a political party, a candidate's ability to come out and say, I won, right? It's like, no, you can't say you won. It's like the authorities have this quick system based on the data, but the actual hand counting of everything will take a few weeks. And so if there are discrepancies, they get ironed out over, proper proceedings. But by on election night, all the media is reporting based on these results. And there's similar mechanisms in the States where I think they're called election night reporting systems. But the difference between the States and Guatemala is we have just one single election authority that reports on the entire nation, right? And so we all get to look at our reporting the election authority's system because it's a centralized source of truth. It's the Oracle. In the US, CNN, Fox, all the media, they have to create these second layers of system that kind of feed in all of these smaller systems into there. So when you're watching the media, you're not getting the results, you're getting the aggregate of the results, right? And so
it's being filtered through the media's interpretation of it. Yeah.
I mean, there's a bunch of filters. So in our case, we're talking directly to the Oracle. And so in 2015, as a volunteer, as soon as I finish my work, I write my document, and we have a carbon paper copy. So the original stays with all of the materials, and there's like secure practices on how to do that. But then I take this like carbon copy and just go to a dude with a laptop that's there at the voting center, and it's like, okay, here's my copy. And he just grabs it, writes down the numbers, and then photocopies it, and that gets sent to the internet. And so in 2015, I was getting a receipt, and I was like, all right, cool. Like I got my receipt, and then I went online and I checked my table, and I checked the results. It's like, all right, it's like everything at my table is cool, right? And I was like, excellent. So Guatemala had 30 plus years of this process, and no election fraud accusations, because it was all super transparent, hundreds of thousands of people participating, and everything was hunky-dory. That's when in 2019, my dad and a cousin of mine decide to run for Congress, because if only the baddies run, then democracy is never gonna, the republic is only in the hands of the bad guys, right? And so the good guys have to get involved. And I'm like, I think there's more to it, but props to you for you do you, man. And they're like, I mean, I'm gonna do me, but could I do me with some money from you? And I'm just like, I don't feel good about this. Like, I don't want to give money to this, but I know how the sausage is made, right? So I graduated in 2019 to being a political party witness, and offered my family members, I will check so that I can tell you whether they stole the election from you. Like, that's the point, right? So election night 2019, I'm running around looking at everything, and everything looks fine. And then when it comes down to the point where people are handing their documents to get scanned, I start to see, oh shit, they're not giving people any receipts. Like, people are just like handing this thing, and it's getting scanned. And I'm just like, no one's teaching the new generation that you're supposed to ask for a receipt,
Yeah.
And I'm just like, oh, this is starting to look weird. And then I have these credentials as a political party IT witness to access the back end of the website that they're using to publish to the media. And so I run to where this is happening. The computer guy is giving all sorts of excuses as to why the system's not up yet, and a bunch of us are showing up, just like slamming on the doors, like, you are legally obligated to give us credentials and keys to the system. Like, it's 7:00. Like, the system should have gone live an hour ago. What the hell is going on? So things are starting to get weird. Finally, I get access, and we log on to the system, and basically what I have access is an FTP server, which, for folks that don't know, is basically just, and I don't know if you can explain to people what an FTP drive is.
Just a network drive. You get to look at all the documents in a folder, basically. Yeah.
You're like using the internet to go into someone's folder, right? And in the folder, it's supposed to have a CSV file, so just a table, a database, and then some folders with JPEGs, so all of the pictures from all of the scans from all of the files. Okay, and back in 2019, there were supposed to be 21,000 tables. We run 5 elections in our general election, so each table had to produce 5 documents. So 5 by 21, it's 105,000 JPEGs. And the CSV file is supposed to contain the data from all 105,000 JPEGs in data format. And so I'm logged in, and you'd think that it should go from 0 JPEGs to 105 JPEGs, right? Like, that's the natural order of things if reality matters. And then it's like 0 to 10 to 5 to 20 to 10 to 50 to 25 to 80 to 40 to 100 to a 0 to 100 to 0. And it's just madness, right? Like, you've got news anchors trying to log on and all of a sudden it's like 0, the database is frozen. And so like, can you imagine what happens if like Fox or CNN or whoever is like, our feed just went down, like, and now it's saying this guy's winning, now it's saying this guy's, like that's what happened on election night in 2019. And so of course
the whole world went bonkers in 2019 and 2020. The whole world just went absolute bonkers. I swear to God.
I think it's still bonkers, but
it still is. No, it just happened. It just happened then. They didn't like roll back or anything. It was a permanent shift.
Yes. The clowns took over for sure. Mm-hmm. Or they just decided to stop, not being clowns anymore. So anyway, for the first time since 1980, the last time we literally went to war with each other to, overthrow the government because we were sick of election fraud. For the first time, right, left, up, down, every candidate, like it was, I think the final count was like something like 12 people running for president were accusing the election system of fraud from like all walks of life, this was not a left-right issue in 2019. Mm-hmm. Of course, a bunch of people like weren't connected to the system like I was. So I was like one of the only guys that was connected to the system that also like kind of understood, the political system, et cetera. And so I started to get dragged into these meetings with these boomer lawyers that are like fighting each other of like, it's just madness. And so everyone's like, so how do we fix it? And someone like shoves a microphone in front of me. And so I get up and I'm like, hi.
Hi.
So I was doing all of this anonymously, to be honest, and that was it was the point when I realized if I have to step forward. Like this is the time to take the microphone. It does mean I'm no longer anonymous and I'm outing myself. And all of a sudden, like I don't know what's going to happen, but but fuck it, right? Like someone needs to stand up. And so
YOLO.
Yes. And so, hey boomers, and I'm like, a picture, right? Like, yeah. So a picture is a JPEG file. When you open Windows and you like look at the thing, it says JPEG. It's like, so it's got like information in it. And so there's this thing called hash. And think of a hash as like if a picture is a human body, the hash is like your fingerprint, right? So the pictures have been changing. It's at this point it's been like 5 days of the database just like warped and warped. And you're like, so what we need to do is you need to publish the pictures with their fingerprints, right? Just like imagine they're a human body, and I don't need I need the bodies, but I also need you to give me like a list of all the fingerprints of what you have on your database, so that if something happens tomorrow and you change it again, I can check to see if anyone.
We can just check the fingerprint, and everybody knows they're on the same page.
And they're like, I didn't know that. Yeah. And so I'm like,
science data hash, okay.
So I'm like, and I recommend this specific, because there's a lot of ways, like you could take the index fingerprint, you could take the pinky, but so you could do this in a lot of ways. So I recommend this thing called SHA-256, right? And they're like, so we'll tell the IT guy that publish. But tomorrow you gotta publish all the files with the fingerprints and they're secure hash. And they end up putting out this document, and I'm pretty sure it's the first document ever produced by the Guatemalan government that says documents will be published with their accompanying hash, secure something or other, right? And you're like, holy shit, I got the word hash on a government document.
I did a thing. Oh my God.
I did a thing. And so anyway, afterwards I was obviously like, I'm not going to trust the database, because there's the JPEGs, but there's also the database that with the numbers, right? And so like, I don't trust the database. Let's say I have the documents. What now I have to do is I have to read all of these. But it's 100, and they gave me 101,000, so 97%. And within the 101,000, there's like 20, 30 data fields that you want. So it's like every single party and how many numbers. And so it turns into millions and millions of data points, right? And so I was like, this is an OCR problem, right? And I don't know if you want to explain what OCR is. Or
what's the acronym for?
yes, optical character recognition. So it's just literally like
just being able to look at the image and see the characters. Yeah,
right. That's our problem. We have hundreds of thousands of these, and it's an OCR problem because we just need to look at the image file and turn it into.
I never knew what that acronym was for. That's funny.
Or what there you go. For, and I'm kind of going crazy because what would you say is the most famous OCR technology that has ever been like that you've used, or what comes to mind with OCR? It's like it's usually CAPTCHA. Right? And if you're of our age, you will recall that the first CAPTCHA, like back in early 2000s, they showed you 2 words, right? Like you just had a text box with 2 words that looked kind of funky, and you were just supposed to type in the words. And
God, the good old days.
Now we get crosswalks and fire hydrants and all that stuff. But in the old days, you had 2 words, and what was happening there was the system already knew one of the words, so that was like your test. If you failed the test, then you have to do it again. But then the other word, you were creating it so that it became someone else's test. And that's how they essentially took all the JPEG files from the Library of Congress, and like all of the books that ever existed were turned into JPEG files. And then Google acquired this and then turned all of those JPEG files into databases, right? And it just so happened that the inventor of CAPTCHA is the most famous Guatemalan tech entrepreneur, Luis.
Really?
Indeed. And so...
No shit. Today I learned.
Small countries usually, know their local folk heroes, right? So if you're a tech entrepreneur like me and you don't know Luis von Ahn's story, like you're not paying attention. Like, dude's a billionaire now. Like, after selling CAPTCHA to Google, then helping them create reCAPTCHA, and how many fire hydrants do people click on every single day? Like, you can thank a Guatemalan every time you click on a fire hydrant, right?
Stupid Guatemala, I hate this shit.
And so, I was going crazy because I was like, all we need to do to to save 2019's election is to just learn. If Guatemala knew how to use its own technology, we wouldn't have this problem, right? And so I first attempted to contact him, and through some friends, and basically received word back saying like, cool idea, man, but we're like IPOing Duolingo. Because Luis von Ahn is also the founder of Duolingo, which people may know about. It's the most famous like language learning app.
Yeah, I used it for a bit actually, but I didn't learn anything. I didn't.
Well,
my fault, not the software. So.
Works for some people, and that's why this guy, he's the most famous tech entrepreneur from Guatemala. So I was just like, all right, well, then I'm going to figure out how to do this. And so I just put a bat signal out, and got a bunch of essentially it's nerd sniping. I nerd sniped the heck out of all of the local software developers to tell them, look, I know this problem. I have the database. I just need to code something. And so we built this open source version of CAPTCHA, applied to this problem, and we started doing it. But it took us 3 weeks to publish the code. And by that point, the authorities came out with their official results. And so all of a sudden, everyone's like, right. So we built this tool, 1,500 people logged in. They were furiously working on it. We were starting to get traction, but then the authorities come out with the results, and everyone's like, why bother? Like they've already, it's a done deal, right?
Yeah.
So... And I'm going to political parties saying, dudes, like, what are you doing? Like, how do you trust this? And that's when I realized...
Nobody has the results. Yeah.
Like, I realized our political parties are essentially just a part of this proof of stake system. Like, the votes don't matter to them. It's just a matter of what stake do the parties have, and how do they negotiate outcomes that, just continues the status quo. And... I realized this is why proof of work is so important. This is why we have to run the nodes, because if we go from proof of work to proof of stake, then it's just this cabal of stakers negotiating on our behalf, and they don't like, even though they're supposed to care, like what they tell me is like, it's impossible, man. It's 100,000 documents. Like you can't do it. That's too much work.
Yeah.
It's like, I was like, wow. Like
Well,
that's
the whole point. It's like we don't have election results. We have election callers. You know, like you remove the whole purpose of even going through this giant dance.
I was even talking to, so my dad was running for Congress. His candidate, I mean, their party was going to disappear because they didn't get anyone elected. And I was talking to the guy just saying, like, you have to fight for this. And he was like, and I guess so they threw him a bone or something. And like, even the people that lost didn't care. Like they just, I guess there was enough money being sloshed around and distributed that you could just buy everyone off. And you know, who wants to fight, right? Like, and, you know, that's where other people told me, like, everyone knows it's a show, man. Like but it's too fragile. Like it's, you know, this is too nuanced. Like people can just, they've accepted what we've told them. And if you're trying to throw a wrench in this, like Guatemala's delicate balance will collapse and we're going to go back into, you know, civil war. And I was like, I mean, but then all these hundreds of thousands of people and volunteers, like they do they know this? I like they don't. Like I know them, and they actually think this matters. And so I realized, like, no one, like there's hundreds of thousands of people that, you know, have really deep feelings and care about this so much that they work their butt off every 4 years. Some of them risk their lives because it can get gnarly in certain jurisdictions, and then like it's just this proof of stake, you know, negotiation. And so I was frustrated, and I couldn't do the audit. Like I couldn't figure it out because, you know, I made a bunch of mistakes. But then I realized, you know what? My main mistake was I reacted to a situation. You know, I waited for the system to crash, and then I tried to fix it, like in like the patient's dying on the table, and I'm trying to fix it. It's like
you're trying to put it together post-disaster rather than prevent a disaster from happening. Yeah.
And so that's where, you know, I'm just like, I'm going to lower my time preference, and I'm just going to patiently wait, because the beautiful thing about our election system is, you know, 4 years later, it just happens all over again. And so just bide my time and then start to read and research and go to as many Bitcoin conferences and talk to as many Bitcoiners as I could. And I went to one in a Human Rights Foundation event in 2021, where I met the folks from Stackwork, which I don't know if you want to explain a little bit about what they do, or I can do it. But
this episode is brought to you by the Cold Card hardware wallet. Not only can you get the Cold Card Mark IV, which is one of my favorites. In fact, I still have this one here. This is the one, by the way, that if you have been paying attention to these ads, you should have 6 of the 12 seed words that I set this one up with. These keys are not very secure, and you may very well be getting 150,000 sats if you're paying attention. But I've always loved the Cold Card, and the Mark IV specifically has the NFC, which my ability to use tap to pay in my wallet on my phone is just one of the coolest ways to interact with this. And I have loved it. And the Cold Card Q now has a full QWERTY keyboard. It is basically like a BlackBerry device. It has a large screen so that you can scan with QR, on top of being able to use NFC and USB if you would like, or to fundamentally break those connections in the hardware so that you know those are not accessible. The simple fact of the matter is the Cold Card is how you keep your Bitcoin safe. Check out the numerous security devices at coinkite.com. The link, the details, and the discount code will be right down in the show notes. And if you came here hoping to get your 150,000 sats, the second word is town, the 7th word is merit, and the 11th word is resist. If you want to punch these into your Cold Card, you can buy one at the link below. Yeah, I don't really think I've tried to get Paul on the show a couple times, and when we talk, and he's just like, we'll do it after I'm done with this thing or whatever. Like, he's always just like zoned into his stuff, but he's so fascinating to talk to. He gets so into it, man.
Yes.
But yeah, just for anybody who doesn't know, I feel like Stackworks is mostly, it has its biggest audience, or I guess user base, in Africa, does it not? Or is it Central America?
I think it's Philippines, and then El Salvador has a big portion. But to be honest, I don't know their. I mean,
Okay.
who knows? It's a global global workforce.
Yeah. But it's basically micro tasks. It's paying people in sats for micro tasks and essentially crowdsourcing a labor force. And then in the Stackworks system, you can basically kind of create your own workflow and then any tasks that need to be done. And then kind of on this massive scale, you can crowdsource all of your labor for doing each of these things. And you can even build in like a check system. So somebody else is being paid another few sats to check the work of the other person. And then everybody's building reputation. In the meantime, it's crazy. It is an insanely ambitious idea. And the fact that it even works the way it is now is pretty nuts. I really wanted to get him on the show to talk about this.
You should. Of course, you know, the busiest.
That's the rough draft idea.
The busiest people are the coolest people, right? And they don't usually have time to go on to talk for hours, but he's definitely one of the most interesting people I've ever met. And what he's built is amazing. And when he described it to me, I was like, wait, so all that work I did to build this open source thing for this very unique, specific use case is gone to crap because you have this machine that is basically general application for anything. And so the message is, if you all of a sudden have this problem, any kind of problem, that you need to do millions of things about, right? And those things that you need to do can be done on a cell phone. Stackwork is probably going to be the cheapest, most fastest, most competitive solution for you, and you're paying people in sats. So in my case, I was like, all right, on election night, I'm going to have in 2023, the number of tables went to 25. So 25,000. So 5 elections times 25, it's 125,000 documents. And the database was about 3.2 million data points. And so it's like, I need to grab these files and I need to check all of this. And I need to do at least like anywhere between 5 to 8 million jobs of people looking at numbers and plugging them in. And so Stackwork was just incredibly awesome to just help me do this. And so on election night, I am hooked onto the system. And well, this is where the last thing I'll say is because, in preparation is in 2019, because the files were changing, like even if I had Stackwork, it would have been like kind of useless because if I would run it on the files, then next day they just come out with another 100,000 files, right? And so it's like start all over. Like if you don't have firm ground to stand on and the authorities can just change the data on you, then my lawyers told me, like, if your audit contradicts what they're saying, technically that's treason. So you could go to jail for treason, which hasn't happened. No one's been accused of treason in Guatemala in like 100 years. So I was just like, oh. And so I was like, well, then what can I do to protect, to make sure that I can prove that I didn't change the files, but rather the authorities did. Yeah. So then I was talking to a bunch of other friends, and that's when they were like, well, you should use open timestamps. I was like, what? And so this is the other side of it, which is opentimestamps.org. For those that don't know, you should go check it out. It's awesome. It was built by Peter Todd.
It's really great. It's been around for a long time.
2016, 2017.
Yeah.
You literally, I don't know if, can I share my screen, Guy, and show this?
Yeah, you should be able to. Here, I can do mine too, but opentimestamps.org, right?
Well, I'll do it because I can then jump.
Can you do it on your side?
Yeah. Let me do it. So opentimestamps.org. You can go there. It's all open source. You can go and check all the links and all the stuff, but it's kind of like Bitcoin in that it is very easy for individuals. So what I'm going to do right now for you is I am going to put on this open timestamps a JPEG file of one of the election documents that I have just like randomly around here. And I just literally drag and drop a JPEG file. It gets it, and then it says, "Ooh, success! It's timestamp." And now I can download what's called an OTS file. And so, basically, what this means is if I keep the JPEG on my local drive and I keep the OTS file or the proof file on my drive, then I've outsourced to Bitcoin the hash that ties it all together. And so This is not putting JPEGs on the Bitcoin time chain, because everyone thinks that when people have been avoiding me like the plague over this entire year because they all think I'm putting JPEGs, hundreds of thousands of JPEGs.
This is the one use case. This is the one. This is like ignore all of that other crap. This is the one thing that this is fantastic at. Bitcoin is a time chain. It's an immutable history. Just put a hash. That was the whole point. That's the whole point. Is NFTs should just be a hash. It should all just be a hash. Damn it.
So all I need to do, like the storage is on my end. The storage of the proof is on my end, and Bitcoin just has a hash that through very complicated cryptography I can use to prove that something existed, right? And so in the example of the election, what I did was when the election authorities in 2019 finally gave me all the files, I grabbed it all, I put it in the zip file, and then I put the zip file into what you just saw. It took a while to upload, and then it gave me the proof. And so now I can say, all right, if tomorrow the election authorities publish another round of JPEGs that's different, I can prove that they changed the files to what they had yesterday. And so I can accuse them of election fraud. But again, this is it's easy for individuals, but it's harder for institutions, kind of like Bitcoin. So now what I'm showing you is trep.gt. That's TREP.gt. This is the election results database of the Guatemalan election system. And so I can click between Presidente and other elections. So I'm just going to stick to Presidente. And the system is saying, hey, yeah, we've got 121,227 JPEGs. That's 99.12%. All right, great. I could click here where it says database to download the CSV files. And then down here, I've got my little map. So for folks that have never seen Guatemala, that's a map of Guatemala, right after Mexico again. And then down here is the national totals of all of the clowns in my clown world. See, it's a very colorful show. We have the opposite of not enough choices. We have way too many choices. But so see, it's like 87,676. Wow, cool database, bro. But like, I don't trust verify. Like, how do I know this isn't nonsense? And so our system allows for this section here that says results by voting table. That's what that says in Spanish. And down here it says table, and there's a text box. So what is your favorite number, guy, between 1 and 24,500?
21,000.
Sorry, yeah, you were muted instead of 21,000. I was like, I guess you don't want to reveal a secret or something. I don't know.
I was like, what about your second favorite number? I was like, did you not like my first choice? What was this?
So see, now instead of looking at the national totals, I'm looking at table number 21,000 at voting center 32 in the municipality of Sayaxchen, Department of Petén, in the country of Guatemala, in the election of the presidency, right? So again, cool database, bro. Look at all the clowns in my clown world. Well, this is a single table, so it's a maximum of about 400 votes. But again, cool database, bro. I want to verify, so I can go all the way down here to this button that says ver, which is verify or see. And so now I'm looking at
verify hash.
And so on the left, you have the JPEG. So you can see table number 21,000 was created by Vilsan, Mary, and Lourdes, right? And they're saying all of the votes were distributed amongst all of these parties, right? Over here, right? Handwritten. And then on the right, there's the totals in the center. And on the right, there's the signature from the president, secretary, and vocal, or director or whatever. So all three mining nodes sign. And then below that, you can see this table had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 different validating nodes or political party witnesses signing off that the data that was handwritten here is indeed correct. But of course, we are talking June 27th, 2024. How do we know that this JPEG hasn't been manipulated in the last year, right? Well, there's a conspicuous orange button here. That's a very peculiar shade of orange. And so we've left the data, this website, this database that was run by one tech provider that built it. But then we went to the immutable backup service that is built by tamper-proof. And so, full transparency, I was an election auditor for the system. And as a result I used their tools, and as a result of collaborating with them, I've now been hired. And so now I work with tamper-proof. And so the immutable backup service, all that it does is says they had API access to the backend. And so they just write down, we received the document on our database, this specific one, June 25th, 2023 at 8:59 p.m. GMT -6. And that JPEG has this hash, this SHA-256, which starts with 42C7, right? It was confirmed on blockchain. And we specifically, never use the word Bitcoin, because if you can avoid using the word Bitcoin when you're talking to government types, then blockchain. Well, there's
Everybody likes blockchain. Blockchain's cool.
Yeah, blockchain's so cool. And, it's a very, very specific shade of orange, of course. And then, here you've got the timestamp for the block, which says June 25th of 2023 at 9:24 p.m. GMT -6. So what is the time difference between this and that? They are very publicly saying, we had this on our servers for 25 minutes before there was, proof on Bitcoin. And then again, the files, open timestamps, all you need to do is download your original file and the proof, right? So here's the source file, which we can view and download. So visually, we could go in and see, Vilsan and whatever, and compare it visually to the one on the other database. But that is very time consuming. So easier would be to download and then just get the hash and do a bulk comparison. But then the OTS file, again, you can view it. OTS file is a proof file. It stands for Open Timestamps File. And boom, you've got all these very, complicated, boring, text cryptographic proofs that, are lovely for those that are inclined, right? But we also built this thing called View Merkle Tree that puts into visual format what that text file was saying. And so all that Open Timestamps does is, here's the hash of the file, 4274, right? Again, if you go back, the hash was started with C74. So we are looking at the same hash. We could copy it even if we want. And visually, what we're saying is this is at the bottom of this tree. And then next to it is this other hash that we don't know really anything about, because we're only looking at our proof for this JPEG. But then it's combined into this mother hash. And you can see the two hashes. And so there's a new hash, a hash that is the product of the combining the previous two. And then all we're showing you graphically is you can just follow this up all the way up. And all of these are individual hashes that all are just hashed and hashed and hashed and hashed into this giant Merkle tree that finally gets to the last one, which is the Merkle root. And so in the Merkle root, you have the last hash. And again, in the Open Timestamps file, here's all a proof, so you could do this all yourself. But in the final one, it also includes a transaction ID. So if you run your own node, you could use this transaction ID to find this transaction, or we just provide a link that takes you straight to mempool.space to that specific transaction, which says, drumroll please, block number 795955, which block number 795955 is what's being revealed here. But now I'm not looking at tamper-proof's database. I'm not trusting tamper-proof. I'm going on to Bitcoin. And I could do this on my node. And then if I copy and paste and look, control F the hash of the root hash, there it is, DAAC9. And so we go back to the Merkle root and we see that DAAC9 is the SHA-256 that's at the Merkle root. And therefore, assuming all the cryptography leading up to this, which here's the proof, was done well, what this means is we have this transaction that was on the Bitcoin time chain at 9:11 p.m. on June 25th in block number 795955. And so indeed, Bitcoin is a proof of
existence
or publication.
Proof of publication.
Julian Assange famously said proof of publication. So here is proof of publication that this JPEG that I was showing you earlier, that we randomly selected 21,000, and again, we could do this. All you need to do is build a bot, right, that goes to this website, pulls out, just goes in and enters, 1 and then 2. You just rip out all the JPEGs, and you just check all their hashes, and then you check it all on Bitcoin. And so you can prove that this election actually has these files that weren't created yesterday, but rather were created on election night. That means that it's not perfect, because what about the space between the block? Those 15 minutes, those are golden. You could do some funny stuff there, sure. But again, my origin is 2019, where they had 6 days to change the files. 15 minutes is enough time to do some funky stuff, but 6 days is an eternity.
I also just want to talk about the 2023 election, and how did you, this looks like this is like a nationwide thing. Like you implemented this. This was implemented with every one of these entities or things. How the hell did you pull that off exactly? Like, what was the process there?
Sure. Well, let's see where to start. But so just to emphasize that what I've shown is that all of the information that contains all of the votes of all of the tables is now registered on Bitcoin in a tamper-evident way. Now, it was done on election night in close to real time. Essentially, the time between blocks is the time that folks could have done some funny stuff, which my haters say, oh, well, it can still be attacked. And I'm just like, yeah, but remember the context of 2019. They had 6 days to do whatever they wanted. Now they had, 10 minutes, 15, maybe, on the off chance a block took like an hour, like maybe an hour. You eliminate 99% of the attack surface to a single moment in time, which is the beginning. And when you do that, would-be attackers are forced to take risks and make mistakes. When someone is planning on doing election fraud, this doesn't mean that it's impossible for them to do it, but it narrows the window so much that they are likely going to mess up. And when they mess up, you catch them. And when you catch them, you can actually take the right people to jail for the right crime, instead of just arguing past each other based on, your guy didn't win and whatever, right? So it's huge. And it also, proved the use case beyond just elections, but because elections are our most important registry, a public registry, and it's key that no one is able to change our election history. But it also means that this could potentially be applied to anything, right? Because you were asking in terms of how did we do this? We were lucky in that Guatemala has one centralized authority that bubbles everything up into this one website, and so they had this one provider in this one cloud that they were working in, and so they signed the contract I think 4 days prior to election night, and so because they were using the same cloud tools we were using, it was just something we could pull off within a few days, and it worked, right? It's because it's a digital information and records keeping tool. It's not an election tool. It's just digital records. And once you use this tool, as long as you make them public, right? If any authority, any registry publishes information to the internet, that information, if they use simple proof or some other implementation of open timestamps, that information can't be altered without leaving evidence. And so I don't know if you've heard of Orwell's dictum, and it's made the rounds again recently because of Julian Assange, where for him, he's like Orwell's contribution to academic thought or just to humanity is Orwell's dictum, in that and I might butcher this, but it's he who controls the present controls the past, and he who controls the past controls the future. So that technically timestamping information to Bitcoin in a way where no one can change the database breaks Orwell's dictum for the first time in history, where I want to live in a world, and what Simple Proof is building is a world where all records and eventually all information is timestamped to Bitcoin, so that no public registry, every time a citizen interfaces with the state, that information, you can have proof that it hasn't changed.
Yeah.
We can't take away the power of the government to issue public registries. Like, I can't imagine any scenario where the government, this social apparatus doesn't manage elections and doesn't produce election results. Like, how else would we do it? Like, it's hard to, like, in an anarcho-capitalist way, like, there's always going to be an oracle. But what we can do now with Bitcoin is essentially not take away the oracle's ability to issue the reality or official records, but we take away their ability to change them ex post facto to meet their whims and changing prerogatives. And that is, we have barely begun to scratch the surface in doing this, even though it's one of the most powerful and straightforward tools that Bitcoin has. I mean, in the emails that came out of the Craig Wright case, Satoshi specifically says that this is like the one other application that he had in mind for Bitcoin. And you said, open timestamps, you said, it's been along for a while. And I have yet to meet a Bitcoiner that is against open timestamps. And it's almost like Bitcoiners disagree on everything except 21 million and open timestamps. And so, our mission is to do that. And I can also, I don't know if I can share my screen here, but
I think you should be able to.
So it's like, super cool application of Bitcoin. And, Guatemala is the first country in the history of the world to use Bitcoin to protect its voting system. Like, that is a true statement. It's not hyperbole. Guatemala is the first country in the world to protect its national election system with Bitcoin, right? So,
that's so cool.
Beyond just the feel goodness for Bitcoiners, like, well, what is it good for? Is, I hope it needs to be good for some. If you can share the pictures that I just shared, they're just 1, 2, 3, 4. So we can start with number 1. So the context is the election results of 2023 in Guatemala were very surprising. Like, no one would have told you that the guy that won was going to win, right? And the summary of it is, Guatemala has, since the Second World War, since the Cold War, since 1955, after the CIA sponsored a coup, because famously the CIA started and their first coup was Iran. Their second coup was Guatemala, right? So ever since the CIA coup of 1955 in Guatemala, we have had the same owners, and they have changed management, every so often. And this includes our democracy of the last 30 years. It's the same ownership structure, different management. The winner of the 2023 election was so surprising that it's the first time that it's a president that I would say has a different owner. It's they're no longer associated with the same ownership structure, right? And so immediately the regime, weaponized itself and claimed election fraud. And their argument was, this is such a low probability scenario. Like, none of the polls had this in the polls, it must be election fraud. There's no other explanation. And so they create this narrative of election fraud, and they're attempting to repeat the elections. And of course, throwing the guy that won in jail so that, we can have a repeat of the election without that guy. And so that's what they were attempting to do. And of course, a bunch of people are mobilized, and it just becomes crazy. At one point, it felt like we were going to go to war again. And finally, in December, the Election Crimes Unit of the Guatemalan justice system presented its evidence of election crimes. And that's what I sent Guy, which I don't know if he can pull up on the screen.
Okay, here we go. All right.
Yep.
So is this the...
So let's start with that
This
one.
is the first image. Yeah.
Yes. So what you're looking there on the x-axis is time. Essentially, on election day, it starts at 0 hours on election day and then goes basically for 50 hours. So it covers about 2 days on the x-axis. And then on the y-axis is all the JPEGs that I was showing you. So there's 125,000 of these. And so all we're doing is showing graphically how those JPEGs manifested over time. And so the gray line is what the Election Crimes Unit is using as evidence. They're saying, look, there's also a line at the 18-hour mark because that's when the polls closed. What they're saying is, oh, look, we have plotted the timestamp of the JPEGs that we found in the metadata field. And we have found that the JPEGs themselves in their metadata, there's 3% of the 125,000 that have a timestamp prior to polls closing on voting day. And so for them, and maybe you can see it says smoking gun. That's the smoking gun evidence that there was election fraud, because it's impossible to have files, JPEGs, prior to the polls closing, right? Like that, the polls close at 6, and that's when people count the votes in front of the witnesses. And so the files have to exist afterwards. And so they're like, this is proof positive of election crimes. When they finally came out with this, I was like, wow, how did I miss this? Let me look at everything and let me compare it to our timestamps with Bitcoin. So if you can set up number 2 now, we are basically, that next file is the timestamps that are on Bitcoin, right? And so when you plot the timestamps of the JPEGs based on what Bitcoin has, and you plot that overlaid on top of the metadata and the JPEGs, you get a very different picture, which anytime now we shall see. There you go. So this is what we call the non-smoking gun. So basically what you're seeing now in orange is what Simple Proof has, and Simple Proof put on Bitcoin. All of the JPEGs all coalesce around midnight. And so not only is the 3% gone, but the more important factor is around the 33-hour mark, there is the much bigger pile of JPEGs that magically exist in the future outside of Bitcoin. So the question is, how can something exist on Bitcoin at midnight and yet have a timestamp that says that it came from the future? There are basically 2 plausible explanations for this. And that's what the next file is, the next picture file is. Either time travelers hacked the Guatemalan election, Rick and Morty plus, Back to the Future, Great Scott, Doc. So some human beings discovered time traveling, and their first point of business was, we are going to hack, commit election fraud in Guatemala in 2023. That is the necessary argument from the Election Crimes Unit. Why? Because if 53% of the files exist in the future, but they exist in the past in Bitcoin, then it's just impossible. Like, there's no way that information exists in the past that was created in the future.
Yeah.
So the second explanation, which is the final picture that I gave you, so number 4, is the most plausible, which is whoever was operating the scanners the hardware that created the JPEG files misconfigured the time zones. And therefore, 3% of the scanners believed that they were in American Samoa out in the Pacific Islands. So a good 11 hours in the past, and then 53% of the scanners were configured as if they were in Baghdad, another 11 hours in the past. And then 44 in Guatemala. But when you use Bitcoin, you realize what's more likely, time travelers or misconfiguration of hardware. And so this is literally what we are telling the election authorities to use in court. Last week, the Election Crimes Unit presented their arguments in court to say, 3% was created prior to polls closing, therefore there was election fraud. And so now we'll get to see if the lawyers of the Election Crimes Unit decide to use Bitcoin to prove that no election fraud happened. And so we shall see, right? But if we had not timestamped all of these election documents to Bitcoin, then it would be impossible to demonstrate, beyond reasonable doubt and with mathematics and cryptography, that there was just a mistake. And so now we still have democracy in Guatemala, and it's in no small part because of Bitcoin. Otherwise, a stupid misconfiguration of time zones might have destroyed our democracy.
Wow. So I did not catch that part of the story. So what it was that because there was apparent confusion of the data and it was looking like the time that all of this occurred was all over the place, they were claiming election fraud to basically try to overturn it. And Bitcoin basically shows that there wasn't election fraud, that somebody just screwed up punching in the time somewhere.
Yep. And so, they've been arguing election fraud regardless, right? Their point is their guy lost, they lost power. They've been in power for 80 years. They don't want to lose power because many people are going to go to jail. And so they are just finding what narrative is the strongest narrative. And they found this and they go on the media and say, but they didn't count on us finding this information, and you can right click on the JPEG and go down to properties and you will find this information yourself, and they didn't think we would catch them. It's like, really? Like that's the level of quality investigators we have working at the Election Crimes Unit. But of course it did concern us, and when we plotted it, that's when it's like, well, obviously this is what happened. And the contractor that misconfigured this, it's like that it's a huge fumble on their end. And that's when you realize, elections are so fragile and everyone's on edge that something as stupid as making a mistake with time zones.
And stakes are so high because it's a system of like, you're all going to do what I say, like it's crazy to have it go to someone that seems illegitimate. And it's like one of those things is why you don't have a huge government. The higher the stakes, the bigger the chance of something stupid like this. A time zone error on a computer could literally send society into chaos.
Like it's the famous, what's Occam's razor, right? Is it some super like Dr. Evil awesome dude, or is it someone fumbled and just click the wrong buttons, and that could be the end of the world, right? But
that's how we all die. If it does go, that's how it is,
right? And so it's like, well, if we use Bitcoin, then we'd have this independent arbiter, right? Like this is not, and the most beautiful thing about this is right now with the U.S., right? And if we can focus on that, it's saying, I don't know what's going to happen in November. What I would say is, you could bet money on it's going to be a shit show, right? And this is just something that very obviously benefits everyone involved prior to election, right? Before people know the outcome, we can demand doing this. It's cheap. It can be implemented quickly. It doesn't change however you vote. Like I'm not saying do paper ballots, do e-voting, like none of that. Like that's just up to the legislature in your state and whatever heck system they decided to use. All we're saying is, if there are digital files that are going to get created, well, let's timestamp everything to Bitcoin so that ex post facto we can actually look at what happened. And if someone tries to pull, a fast one on us, people will be able to see. And so it only benefits people who want truth. The people that don't benefit from this are the liars that can benefit from causing chaos. But on both sides of the aisle and across the aisle, like left, right, up, down, there are most people do want truth, but there's this like smaller percentage of folks that are finding ways to just benefit from the madness and the lies. And this doesn't eliminate everything. There's still a lot of things to do, but at the very least, it is kind of insurance for election authorities against mistakes, against unpredictable things. And like Forrest Gump said, like shit happens. So we hope, and our message to Bitcoiners everywhere is reach out. We like contact us, simpleproof.com. We're on Nostr as Simple Proof. I'm on Twitter as Carlos Toriello. Reach out to us, email us, please. If you want to put this in front of your local election authority and just say, hey man, do you have a backup plan? Like, what's your plan come November if the shit hits the fan? Like, this is purely backup. Like, this won't change it. You can just carry on with all of your plans and just purely have a backup of all of your files that you can timestamp to Bitcoin so that it, after the fact, when the dust settles, you can actually look at whoever's accusing one or the other with fraud or whatever, and just look at what Bitcoin says and decide for yourself what's real, not because so-and-so said something, right? And don't trust Simple Proof, right? This is all open protocols. It's all published. Download all the data and just check it yourself.
This is the Swan Bitcoin app, and this is how easy it is to just buy Bitcoin whenever you're feeling like it. And I feel like it right now. And as it shows me right here, I still have $9,388 worth of my $10,000 of Bitcoin buying that has no fees whatsoever. And now I have $10 more worth of Bitcoin. I do this quite often. One of the really great things about Swan is the incredible number of resources they have for learning and understanding anything that you want to know about Bitcoin. And importantly, they're going to teach you why you should not trade. They're not going to encourage you to trade. They are Bitcoin only. If you're looking for an easy and reliable way to get into Bitcoin, if you're looking to put Bitcoin in your IRA, if you're looking to put Bitcoin in your business, if you're looking to do anything around getting on a Bitcoin standard or getting exposed to Bitcoin in your portfolio, check out swanbitcoin.com/guy is my special link, and you will find it very conveniently right in the show notes. That's so crazy. That's so crazy. So you don't know about the outcome of this yet? You were saying that they were making the
in Guatemala, you mean?
Yeah, in Guatemala.
So the story there is the election authorities signed the results, like made it official. It's like so-and-so won, and then for context, our election authorities are actually part of our justice system. We have a Supreme Court. Then we have a Supreme Court, and then we have the election authorities. Like in the justice hierarchy, that's like they're amongst the highest judges of the land, right? They're like 3 tiers down from literally the top. They signed the form saying so-and-so won, and then immediately they went to the airport and fled the country to go to the United States, basically because they believed that they didn't have constitutional guarantees that they wouldn't get thrown in jail. So yes, Guatemala basically is kind of a dictatorship, is a failed state, and our highest ranking judges prefer to flee the country than go through the legal system. And so they tried to repeat the election. They couldn't. There was revolt. We had a massive uprising like we haven't seen since the 80s revolutions. And so finally they got the message and they realized we can't change the guy. Really, it's more like the U.S. Wanted to defend democracy, and so sent a clear message that the elections had to be respected, the outcome, right? And so the guy took office, the new president, Bernardo Arevalo, took office January 15th. And so the election authorities came back in February, right? So they're like, oh, now that he's in power, then maybe he's going to protect us. And they went to court. They posted bail. So each one of them paid like $150,000 bail. And the court at least like the session started like 2 weeks ago, and the arguments have been presented by the election crimes unit. And so, knowing Guatemala, it'll take like 2-3 years for this to kind of get hammered out. The judge assigned to it is a judge that no one takes seriously. So I don't know if in this case they'll bring up the Bitcoin stuff. It'll probably get what's the word when you have to like take it to the next
appeal.
Yeah, they'll appeal, and so at some point maybe it'll get dragged out for years, and we'll see, right?
Yeah.
But for all intents and purposes, it's been resolved. And then obviously the other cool thing is, and why to do it, a reason to do this is everyone that was involved in the election and cared about the election and heard about this, phony election fraud argument that metadata, and you're like, well, everyone that cared about that at some point heard about Bitcoin. And that's what I mean of providing this touch point. That includes the newly elected president, his entire staff in the executive branch, many people in the legislative, mayors all over the town, a bunch of judges. So all of a sudden now in Guatemala, when I talk to people in government, like Bitcoin did this thing, right? Bitcoin protected the election system. And then, of course, all of the people the 100,000+ people that worked at the tables, I could talk to them and explain this use case of Bitcoin. And so if their brain's been warped by all the FUD over the last 10 years about Bitcoin being bad, well, they have to reconcile it with Bitcoin doing this, right? So it makes it a lot easier to say Bitcoin isn't good or bad. Bitcoin is a tool. And, if you like cell phones, like criminals use cell phones too, right? So it's kind of the same thing. Are you going to stop using cell phones because criminals use cell phones? Or are you just going to figure out how to use Bitcoin to help you? And in this case, Bitcoin protected the Guatemalan national voting system. Hey, let's get Bitcoin on the balance sheet. It's basically, that's where, I'm trying to take it, and we'll see. But in general, the message to Bitcoiners is this can be deployed in your local election. And by December, we could credibly make the case that Bitcoin protected elections in the United States. And if Bitcoin protects democracy, then if you're against Bitcoin, you must be against democracy. So it's my invitation to Bitcoiners everywhere
to say... It's a fantastic logical framing to be able to use against them.
Exactly. Yeah. So don't do it for democracy. I'm not here to convince you that voting matters.
Do it for the arsenal. Do it for the arsenal. That's exactly right.
This is just the FUD war, the narrative, piece. But of course, it's also do it for Orwell's dictum. It's I want to live in a world where every time a public record is put out there, I can download it. I download my OTS, proof. And so if I piss off some bureaucrat at the IRS or wherever, and they want to make up phony documents and try to frame me, well, you could prove that they tampered evidence. And so we can eliminate anyone that's out there that has fear that someone could tamper documents and go after you. Like, A, start using open timestamps yourself, but then B, let's fight to get open timestamps, because with AI, I mean, it's just trivially easy to make fake stuff. But with Bitcoin, it's trivially easy to say, all right, there's a million things, but these are the ones that matter, right?
Yeah.
And so I could care less about all the noise and all the fake stuff. Unless it's entertaining and cool, like maybe, but for the jollies. Yeah. But in terms of like the public records, like I could care less about all this stuff. It's like I want to see hashes, I want to see Merkle trees, and I want to see transaction IDs, and I want to go into the blocks, and I want to say, all right, this file predates your bogus, sock puppet stuff on Facebook or whatever, and on social media, right? And so I do think in a
crazy with AI
world,
like literally, it's going to matter so much. And it's funny too, because like I want to say there were a couple of Central American countries. I cannot remember. I think it was Honduras. I think has this problem like really bad, but that like city officials and government officials will literally give bribes and like there's just an enormous amount of corruption, and they will literally just change city records to who owns what. Like just like give somebody a house on the beach that just belongs to somebody else, and they just go get kicked out.
I know of the case of a family that had their land, and then all of a sudden they showed up and they're like, wait, the land is in someone else's name now, and it's like, yep. And they like, and it's this mafia that was very violent, that not only do they change that so that you'd have to go and fight them in court, but then they sent thugs with guns to say, we already took your shit, and so you have to go and fight us with guns and fight us in the courts. And guess what? We probably have the judges on the take as well, right? So it's changing records and changing archives is very real. Like there are some bad people in positions of power that shouldn't have that kind of power, right? Like there's no reason. There's the history of like we're gonna for Julian Assange right now is like, we should make sure that everything he published on WikiLeaks never gets disappeared off the internet. That's incredibly important. But beyond that, just your local authority that gives you your land deed or issues your driver's certificate and whatever, like that, they shouldn't have that ability either, right? And
And such low-hanging fruit, too.
Yeah.
Like, this is so easy to implement if we just realize how important it is to do so. Like, if we just stop doing it after the fact, after it's a massive problem. If we lead with this, the number of problems we can prevent, like, none of this is complicated.
Nope.
Like, this is as easy as it gets, literally. And
That's
think about it just in the context.
Proof.
Like, it's simple proof, yes. And like I've literally thought about doing a hash of my file system and actually just doing this on a regular basis and putting it into transactions. Because you think about it, if like police officers come and try to accuse you of something else, or somebody steals, like think of like Silk Road, like they try to like corner Ross Ulbricht and say he did something, and here's him in his journal file talking about all this crap or whatever. Like, it's like, oh yeah, I was going to try to kill this person. It's like, did you sure he wrote that? They had your computer, it was unlocked for how long? And you're talking about an officer. Like, I don't even think there was anything about the journal specifically about that, but just as an example, let's say they specifically try to frame him by putting something on his computer, which is not an uncommon thing. Like, this is something that happens. Imagine you can actually prove that that file doesn't exist the day before they took your computer.
Yep.
And especially, they're going to try to timestamp it. They're going to say all of this stuff, and you wait until they present their case, and you be like, "This is the hash of my file system. This is everything in it. This is the printout of my LSALR on my whole freaking machine, and this is the timestamp. This is the hash. This is everything that does not exist. They're full of shit." Like,
exactly.
just in a personal context, and you can do this all across the board on all sorts of things. And with AI, you have no idea. It's so easy to fake shit now. It's so easy with open source tools. It's getting really freaking scary. And I don't think people realize how quick it's happening too, because we've gone from the last year, we've gone from like, I don't even know how to install a lot of these tools, and it would take me like a day or two to figure it out. And then the tool is like kind of sucky, to basically now I have little AI browsers that just have like 100 of these tools that I can just plug in, and half of them are fantastic. Like, I can edit text. I can completely just like stable cascade now. I can just like train it on like a fine tune or a material or something, just alter text as much as I want to. I can in-paint somebody's signature. It's ridiculous what you can do now. It's
exactly
easy.
Now it's of course on the individual level, like this, you're talking about adding another like sovereign individual like habit that we like need to add to the thing of like always like timestamp all, use open timestamps to
timestamp everything you do.
Hash all your stuff, and like, but what we're talking about is, well, yeah, of course, do that if you can, if you have the discipline. What we're trying to do is let's demand this of the state, right? It's hard for an individual. Exactly. It's like, it's hard for an individual to turn this into an ongoing discipline, but there's no reason why we shouldn't, as a citizenry, demand that our public officials do this, because and create the institutional capacity or just requirement, and in some cases legal requirement, like push for laws that say all of the agencies have to timestamp. Like, as soon as something is created, everything gets timestamps and everything goes to Bitcoin, right? Because if it goes to Bitcoin, then they can't change it. Of course, that's the other like benefit of this, is like no other blockchain matters for this. Like, there's
Yeah.
absolutely no reason to use any other blockchain to do this, because every other blockchain you could reorg, you could basically
I was
scale
about to
back
say,
and
totally stupid. Yeah.
like, right. And so we have that advantage.
In fact, if you want those chains to be of any consequence, you should just timestamp those into Bitcoin. So if you use some bullshit, some shitcoin over on the side, you better also at the same time open timestamp that block of your shitcoin into Bitcoin, or it doesn't mean jack.
Yeah. So it's we have a natural advantage over absolutely all of the other networks and any like proprietary solution for this, because it's the only one that doesn't push off the trust issue further upstream. It's like the buck stops here. It stops at Bitcoin, and all you need to do is like learn a little bit of cryptography. But then, so if we can demand that, then let's push it in and require it. And the most beautiful thing is, it doesn't take up space. It doesn't clog up the chain. We can, you could.
It's op return. It's nothing. It's nothing.
Well, it's op return, but it's the way to do it, and the way we do. We have basically 4 calendars, and so whenever we have tons of information, we're sending like 4 transactions per block.
Yeah, it's a hash tree in a hop return. So it's like it could be 1,000 files in one op return. You're not even 1 byte to a
trillion. It could be trillion. So when we're saying every single thing that the government has and produces at every moment in time, every email that Fauci writes, or every everything that all of those people that are there with our living off of the taxpayer dime, everything that they do, if you become a public servant, it should be that you should know that everything you do will live forever and can be scrutinized forever. The fact that that's what's the famous thing is that we thought we were in the world where that government has all the tools to spy on its citizens and citizens don't spy on the government. It's like it should be the other way around. And this is a direct way to do it. It's like if you decide to go into public service, you need to understand that everything you touch is public and is unalterable forever. Right?
Yeah.
If you take away that ability to change the reality and just delete information, then all of a sudden we can level the playing field just a little bit. Like, they'll still have a lot more power, but doing this is just an easy win. It doesn't clog up Bitcoin, but it also, money and making the money argument is so important, and keep doing it. But my opinion is we're kind of reaching the fringes, right? Like, we've talked there are so many podcasts out there, right? So it's like the people that were going to come, that we were going to reach came. Many people will get destroyed by fiat, and that's when they'll understand. Like, you need to get burned by fiat before you realize that you need hard money. And so they'll keep coming, and let's keep making the argument. But this is a completely separate argument. And how many pundits or thought leaders are out there saying, "Ooh, like it's so scary that we live in a post-truth world," and it's like, well, Bitcoin fixes.
Do something about it.
Yeah,
do something about it. Bitcoin fixes that shit.
Yeah. So we made a little documentary about this. It's like chapter 1. Chapter 1 is what happened in Guatemala, and we are actively looking for people that want to help us create chapter 2, which is going to be how what started in Guatemala can be taken and used now in the USA election system. There's over 3,000 election authorities. Your local election isn't run by the feds. It's run by a neighbor of yours. Maybe it's like Sue Ellen down the street from you. Like, it's a matter of just knocking on their door and saying, "Hey, what's your backup plan? I can help you protect against an onslaught of madness. There's this shield that can protect you against, a giant shitstorm. And it's cheap, it's quick to implement. Like, just consider it. It literally is helping election authorities in Guatemala stay out of jail. Like, why not, right? It'll just keep a backup of everything. And if you are the unlucky election authority to get thrown into the gauntlet, you'll have, mathematics and cryptography on your side, not to mention a ton of psychopaths on the internet."
Yeah. All right. So here's my thing. You're probably talking to an audience that really doesn't know jack about the election. And I'll say, I don't really know either. Like, what do you know, and who have you talked to specifically in the American system, to the United Statesian system, to basically try to get the ball rolling or to get someone interested in this? Like, so in the context of like my local authority, who is it that I am contacting? Because I'd be happy to bug somebody. I can automate some emails.
Yeah, it's the county clerk.
County clerk. The county clerk of your area.
County clerk is the one that is ultimately responsible. Obviously, all 50 states have different laws. Each law is basically the rule set, the protocol, and then it gets implemented at the local level by the county clerks, right? Maybe in some cases that's different, and there's this figure of the elections commissioners, and so every state has its own flavor. But at the end of the day, when you actually show up to vote at a voting center somewhere, who's responsible for operating that voting center? It's usually the local county clerk, right? And so just literally reach out to your county clerk and ask them, hey, do you have a plan to protect against artificial intelligence disinformation attacks? Do you have a plan in case your technology provider gets hacked or makes a mistake and misconfigures some time zones? Like, this is purely just in addition to what you're doing, have a backup plan. And if you don't have a backup plan, just know that you might regret it, right? It's cover your ass insurance. Like, it just helps you as an election authority potentially protect yourself. So specifically, if you're listening to this and don't know anything, just start with your county clerk. Ask them. Your election produces digital files of some sort. How are those files going to get stored for auditing later? Let's say an election is contested in your local county, and someone's like, "Oh, there was fraud." At some point, they're going to have to bring out evidence to demonstrate in front of people, to check everything, to make to just verify everything. Well, is digital information a part of that? Are there databases? Are there JPEGs? Like, anything that's going to get used could get essentially a redundant backup, another server somewhere that's saving the information, but timestamped to Bitcoin. And so maybe in your county, they'll tell you, oh, no, we just get, our orders from the Secretary of State or the election commissioner for the city. I mean, I don't know. There's a bunch of different ways, but definitely start with your county clerk. And who knows, it might be someone's cousin, someone's neighbor. I would hope that if there are 3,000 county clerks all over the US, we should be able to find one that's already a Bitcoiner that just doesn't know about this. And it's a matter of also just raising awareness. If you have a local meetup group, please watch our film. It's a 16-minute film. It's called Immutable Democracy. I'm more than willing to zoom in and ask, answer questions that people may have, and just email us, reach out, and we'll help you with everything we can.
Question on the specifically on the Guatemalan side, because honestly, that election system seems fascinating to me. Like, they did the document that we picked at 21,000 or whatever has 9 people verifying 27 votes, which is kind of crazy. And to see that the tables are maxed out at 400 to 500, and even if 9 is the norm, that's such a good ratio to have 9-10 people on 400. So the ability to commit fraud is so limited there. If you can make those, if you can actually have integrity and the ability to check those documents. Obviously the US is a mess with certain counties having, just a handful of people overseeing millions, literally. In the context of, before we kind of get maybe on that a little bit deeper, in the context of the Guatemalan situation, it's the larger election authority that is doing the hashes and stuff, or are the witnesses and the people at the individual tables, when they upload, is that when the hash is getting? And did we solve the problem of them not getting receipts? Are they getting receipts now? And is there a hash related to it? Anything like that?
Sure. So I am an election auditor for the whole system. So prior to joining Simple Proof, I audited, and you can find our audit at digitalwitness.io. It's a 272-page report.
Good domain name. I like that one.
Thank you.
Digital
digitalwitness.io. It's in Spanish, but it's 272 pages of analyzing and comparing the 2015 election, 2019 election, 2023 election. So I used Freedom of Information Act request to rip out the guts of the election system, take out every single thing. I actually asked for the entire history going back to 1985 and got written like official response from the election authority saying, we no longer have records as of 2011 and beyond. So the other reason to do this and to digitally put everything on Bitcoin is all of a sudden election information starts to disappear. And again, he who controls the present controls the past, and he controls the past controls the future. Like, we have to keep better records. We can't let them just recreate history, and especially democratic history, right? So I found out that yes, the election authority had a tragic voting accident sometime 2012 and lost all data. But I got everything 2015 onwards. And so my promise to Guatemala is I will always come back. I will run a full node. So it's a blockchain of the election system. I'm going to download the whole thing every single time. I'm going to check every single data point, and I'm going to analyze the patterns between the official results, my results, and start to figure out what's going on. And so I did all that. I identified all the places where, let's say, I would need more information to feel better about what happened, and came up with a ton of recommendations saying this is how you make the 2027 elections in Guatemala the most trustworthy elections the world has ever seen. And so my goal, as of 2026, 2027, will be work on that so that Guatemala becomes a global leader and example of how you run a proof of work consensus algorithm paper-based voting system that on the night of the election, you know who won. And it's not because the media told you who won. It's because you can download open source software and then just download a bunch of files and run it, and it'll give you the data, right? And so it's like literally turning the Guatemalan voting system into a run your node, right? And so if you don't trust it, you check it, right? And I found many things that are in 2023, the hashes happened once they got to the centralized cloud at the national level, because they contracted us 4 days prior to the election. And so that was the best that we can do. And that was, better than nothing. We had been arguing with them saying, look, we could actually integrate into the firmware of the scanners so that at the voting centers, as soon as you create the JPEG, it's already, hashed and it's already timestamped and the packets just get sent. You can do that.
And on the receipt, you could do it so that on that receipt, you have that hash and that witness can stand there and look, that scan is definitely this file and this is the hash of it. And then you're done. You have a witness straight from what we wrote down and what we looked at to what hash gets put in the chain. Even if it takes an hour to put it in the chain, they have a record on paper of what it was.
Exactly. But I went farther. I was like, definitely we could do that. So every single scanner that's at all the voting centers, we have like 3,000 voting centers, all of them have this and it's in the firmware. However, in addition to that, you should publish an app. And so every single one of those people on at the voting tables, they could download this app and then take their own picture of it. And the same thing happens. You could just hash it off of people's phones. And so instead of just having the one official copy, we could have the 9 different copies from 9 different hardware devices that are all tied to not the 9 different people that were there. And all of that gets hashed to Bitcoin. Like, why not? That is like, you do that and you find one.
Then you've got it so that rather than having one hash, you literally have 9 separate people confirming the hash. And if you ever have a discrepancy, you're like, well, why did these 3 people say it was this hash and these 7 people say it was this?
It's the end. Like at that point, you absolutely eliminate the possibility, and that's where, to me, it's the beautiful thing of having hand-counted voting system with people at the place fighting over the individual ballots, making it that's the moment when we fight about it. Let's not fight. If you have something like what we have now in most places, you have the fight over the ballots take months and happen in the media. It's like, no, in Guatemala, we concentrate the fight at the voting table on election night between the interested parties there. And once they're done literally hashing it out, they just everyone takes their pictures and everything gets sent. And so when I would build a tool that basically says I suck up all of the JPEGs. I analyze all of them using OCR, and AI, and figure out, are there any tables that have kind of very different files, like why? And then just select the one that's the most readable, and that one you start getting the data, and then you have your results, and it's like you run it yourself, right? So that's what I will do in Guatemala, just return so that it becomes the best voting system on the planet, and it turns into a little farm of people running nodes, right? Because it's calling out people on the media saying, you can download this open source software, and all you need to do is download the blockchain, the JPEGs, and then just put it in the software. And so when people get to the end zone and people audited the election themselves, I say, congratulations, here's a link to download the Bitcoin core software or any other core to say, you thought that was amazing. You just, it took you a few hours to audit the entire voting system of the country. Well, here's this thing that audits the entire monetary network of the entire world every 10 minutes. Run your node, right? And so that's like my message to Bitcoiners. Bitcoiners have abandoned democracy. And again, I'm not going to convince you to believe in democracy. What I'm saying is autocracies and dictatorships and monarchies, etc., they've lost this ability to use their voting system to farm more Bitcoiners as just of this consensus algorithm that happens, that a lot of people have a lot of really strong feelings about, that we can use as a proxy and another touch point to say, yeah, cool consensus algorithm, right? Like, oh, super cool. Well, there's this other one that does it every 10 minutes flawlessly for 15 years with 99.999% uptime. And so that maybe helps us. Democracies should have 5% of their population running Bitcoin full nodes, right? That's the reason to like democracy at a minimum is it provides us an opportunity to turn pre-coiners into Bitcoin.
Yeah. Man, that's crazy, man. That's crazy. I think what's most nuts about it is how small, in a sense, what is being done, but how big the impact could actually be. It's not, you're just hashing some shit. It's just like
problem.
Yeah. And I'm curious, how, so y'all have built out this really interesting tool. How drag and drop is it in the context of let's say, so simpleproof.com might be kind of what we're looking at here as a tool.
Yeah.
Is this where I could literally just go to them and be like, sign up with simpleproof.com and then just upload as soon as you get the vote? Is that kind of...
Not yet. Well, we're raising an investment round. We are going the VC startup route, and that's the reason we are raising the money, is because right now, because the election authority was working with AWS, we are basically there for anyone using AWS cloud services, which, in government, it's 40% of all government uses AWS, and we're 30 to 60 days from it just being a button. If your local county uses AWS, before November, it'll just be click this button, select the files that you want to process, and it just happened. We are planning on working with more cloud providers that serve government, and then also recognize that there's maybe another 10% that do local infrastructure. And so building out the tools that simplify that. And that's what that's why we're raising money. That's why we want to grow our team, because I showed you, open timestamps is super simple for individuals, right? But if you're an election authority or like any authority that is responsible for gigantic amounts of information, take for example FOIA, like the Freedom of Information Act people, like there must be ungodly amounts of files being. So it's an industrial scale version of that problem, and like building the right tools, where like you were saying, it's like literally just drag and drop. Right now, we're still a startup. We haven't, we proved that we could do it at scale, and it took us for, very few, a very small amount of time in Guatemala last year. This year, for anyone in AWS, might be like a 1-day implementation type of thing. That's our goal. But obviously, if they have different systems, we can do it. And the sooner we reach out to them, the sooner and the easier it'll be, right? And so, just reach out, simpleproof.com. Our email is there on the contact page, info@simpleproof.com. And just and it's cheap, right? When when we were asked by the Guatemalan Election Authority, like, how much does it cost? They're like, that cheap? Like, you just told me that, like, you're selling me insurance that's going to keep me out of jail, and it's like a rounding error on my yearly budget. It's like, why not? It's like, because and the reason we're going the cloud route for the sovereign individuals that are going to hate us for working for AWS is, look, stuff isn't going to timestamp itself, right? Like, one of the things that we dream about is it should be standard operating procedure for all cloud providers everywhere to be timestamping absolutely everything to Bitcoin. Like, and if you're just working on your node, good, more power to you, but that's not going to change the fact that there's these behemoths of tech companies running all of this data, and they're not doing it. So it's really the fact that they don't have this discipline that is creating the ability for the world to change and whatnot. And so if we're successful in the next 5-10 years, it's because we've turned it into a standard, right? Handling digital information and not timestamping it should, like, I imagine, years from now,
it should be embarrassing. It should be ridiculous.
Years from now, people look back saying, like, what the hell were people thinking? It's like selling a car without a seatbelt, right? It's like, what, like, people made that? Like, why? Maybe there are people that dislike seatbelts for whatever reason, but you get my point.
Wheel.
It's like,
it's a car without steering wheel.
A car without steering wheels, just with like handles or something. It's like made sense at the time.
It rains. Let's go. Let's get it up.
Made sense at the time, but why would you ever do that? And especially with public information, because it's like, doing this as a disciplined sovereign individual where every month or week or whatever you're hashing absolutely everything so that Ross Ulbricht style, like, they couldn't frame you, man, that's a lot of work for an individual. But we can demand this of public institutions and just say, there's the only reason to fight against this is if you want to lie, right? That's the beautiful thing about this argument. It's like, what's your argument against this? Oh, I dislike Bitcoin. It's like, how are they, like, what would someone say? I can't afford it. It's like, well, it's actually like just one transaction per block,
and you're splitting it with everybody else who's using open timestamp.
Exactly.
So, are you kidding me? Like, you can't go look in your couch for a quarter, you cheap ass.
Like, we can get to the point where absolutely everything gets timestamped and we're not plugging up the chain. And so it's like, the only argument against this is
your support fraud, and that's how you frame it.
Exactly.
Oh, so you commit fraud. That's why. That's why you want this. That's why you don't want this.
I forgot to mention that, but it's like, that's the other awesome thing about an election authority doing this. Not only is it insurance for them, not only will they get a bunch of Bitcoiners all of a sudden on Twitter to just go crazy for them and give them all sort of love, but then it signals. It's a very strong signal that we are standing behind our work. We're gonna everything. Like, when I was auditing the election on election night, I didn't know
our cards on the table.
Yeah, I didn't know this was gonna happen. I was ready for everything. I came from 2019 where they changed everything. I'm convinced they stole the election. I'm like, my knives are out, and I'm ready to go with these people because I think they're criminals. And then, boom, they publish the website, and I see a magic orange button that takes me down to my node, and I'm just like, these people like, wow, like I still have some concerns and there's some other stuff, but like the other concerns pale in comparison with the fact that I can now trust what they're saying. And so it's like, wow, good for them. This is a person that is signaling, I am going to stand by my work and
even
check it
if
for
I
me.
disagree with them, at least they're willing to put their integrity behind it. At least they're willing to stake their reputation on it. They're like, well, okay, I will prove it to you. You know, it's a big thing. I mean, it's don't trust, verify.
Exactly.
You're putting the Bitcoin system and cryptography between you so that you can actually create trust. When you have every other reason to distrust them, you're like, okay, maybe we can work together. Maybe we can actually cooperate because you're willing to stand behind this.
Exactly. So it's like if you're a Bitcoiner that's lost faith completely in humanity, maybe when you hear about this one random county that decided to do this and that they're saying all of our files are going to now get timestamped to Bitcoin, it's like, well, at some point, if you decide to vote with your shoes, then maybe moving into that county might, you might be living under a system that you're like, well, I may not agree with everything they do, but at least these people aren't liars, right?
Yeah.
Like at least these people,
they're not actively trying to lie, you know?
So it's a strong signal that I think is underappreciated in everything that's being done. And for us, it's just it would be a pleasure to help whoever's listening to this become that legendary Bitcoiner who got Bitcoin inside of the U.S. election system.
That would be an awesome campaign to literally just be like, see a bunch of people get behind that, that would, man, that would be cool.
Because it also sends a message. We do this in November with 1, 2, I hope 100 counties. And so those 100 Bitcoiners become that legendary group. But then also it sends a message to the rest of the world of like every democracy everywhere in the world looks up to the states in one form or another. And you start to signal this is standard operating procedure for doing this. And so Bitcoiners in the rest of the world can get behind that. And, it's like, if you ever seen that video of the guy, like, how do you start a social movement? And that's a dude, dancing by himself in the park. And it's like, that's me right now. I'm like literally just dancing by myself in the park with my Guatemalan voting system timestamped to Bitcoin, like just super
I'm dancing
happy
with you. I'm coming back.
And I'm just saying, please come and dance with me. It's like, and as soon as one county shows up, like I just need one more dude to show up, and all of a sudden this is going to turn into a party, and I still like, I'm still waiting to hear what the argument is to not do this. Like, oh, I'm too busy talking about sound money and trying to end the Fed. Great, awesome. But if you're not doing anything, right? Like if you're just like listening to another podcast or going on another like Twitter Spaces, call your county clerk, ask him what's up, right? Like, why not?
This is such a good example, actually, because a lot of people still just want to lecture everybody about sound money. And the interview I actually had this morning, which will go out before this one, it will be published, is we were talking about how Bitcoin education has failed or is failing now, and where we've kind of saturated our market. And I read Roy Scheinfeld's piece too of orange pilling has stopped working, and if we're so focused, if we're just certain that the only way this is going to happen, and we're not going to meet people where they are, or with a use case or a value that they actually want to achieve, and we're just trying to get them to value the things that we want, or to want to be interested in the lecture that we want to give, then we're gonna fail. Like we're just not gonna get anywhere. We've reached the end of that market. What we need is them to be interested in it because they have a different touch point. They have a different story that they are related to for why Bitcoin matters, for what it is doing for them, with or without money. They're not going to listen to a lecture about money if they have no interest, or if they don't have some sort of a touch point, unless inflation has literally caused them like awful chaos and they're literally thinking about it. It's not going to, nothing's going to trigger anything. But a story that's relevant to a shit ton of people now is the fact that like half of the electorate of the people in the election in the US believe the shit was stolen. they are prime for telling them that you can use the time chain to prove, to verify the election data. That is an easy audience. Like, that's an easy audience. Go to them, find them, and tell them this story about Bitcoin. Then you don't have to sell them on sound money. That will come later when they realize what an unbelievably valuable thing this is for their purpose. Then they'll ask a question about money. Then they'll wonder what the hell the rest of Bitcoin is.
I'll push back a little bit and say it's not just the 50% that are convinced that it was stolen. It's the 50% that are convinced that it was not stolen, and the 50% of people that think it was stolen are crazy. Like, for those people, it's, hey man, then prove it. Like, what's wrong with just creating?
It's just as good for the defense. It's just as good for the defense as it is for the attack.
That's my point.
Everybody's got it up in the air. Yeah.
Like, I don't know if you've seen those graphs of like that tell you like most people are led to believe that it's an us versus them, and it's like the top 10% against the 90%, and it's like it's an illusion. It's this like small percentage of, it's not like the rich against the poor. There's some people that enrich and in poverty that are the enemy, right? It's saying it left, right, rich, poor, everywhere. There are good people. And if you want truth and you care about the truth, this will help you. And this reaches across the aisle, and it just makes reality clearer for people in a world where we've kind of lost our anchor to reality. And Bitcoin can be that anchor of truth in that sea of lies. The only people that are going to be against this are the ones that are like, well, I like the fact that no one can keep track of all the lies that I've been making, and no one can catch me, and no one's realized I'm a better liar than Sam Bankman-Fried, and I'm just still like running away. It's like it catches up to some people, but there's a ton of people that are getting away with some really preposterous things, and it's just like this benefits truth on all sides, right? So definitely, if you know people that think that the election was stolen, I think they should know about this. But then there's the people that are passionate; they should know about this too, because it's like, wow, like the election authorities in Guatemala were trying to make a case of election fraud, and Bitcoin proved that it wasn't. Like, there was a smoking gun, and yet Bitcoin was the non-smoking gun. And prior to the fact, you don't know what's going to happen. It's just Bitcoin will tell you what happened. And that could either be a smoking gun or it could be a non-smoking gun. It's just, it's going to narrow.
Bitcoin will prove one way or the other whether the gun was fired. Yeah. Yeah, man. That's awesome. That's so crazy. What a nuts thing. So what's the call to action? What's the call to action to everybody who's listening to this, who's interested in like this? I'm probably not even going to vote, but this seems like something so cool to do, to just. And I'm genuinely just kind of like personally curious about what the hell the election system looks like in my area, and it would be cool to actually speak to somebody and be like, listen, do you have insurance? Because the world's nuts right now. Have you bothered to look around? Are your eyes open at the moment? Because you need insurance for this shit, and this is dirt cheap. Like, you really need to do something here. So what's the call to action, everybody?
The call to action is for sure like what you were saying is like, I showed you my JPEGs. Like, my system produces these JPEGs that contain all the information. So it's like, what are your JPEGs? Like, make it an adventure, right? With your kids. Like, we're gonna go down to City Hall or the county clerk's office or whatever and just ask stupid questions. Like, if I wanted to check, if I was an election auditor, like, what do I get? Like, do I get anything? Or do I live in a county that's just like, oh, what you get is, TV. Go ask the television. It'll tell you. Yeah. It's like, if you finding that out for yourself, I think is intelligence that a Bitcoiner should know, right? Yeah. Do you live in a county where democracy is effectively just don't verify, trust the media and the appeal to authority? Or will you discover that there's this tradition of, oh no, like, you might show up and it's like, Sue Ellen from like way back, and she's like, "Oh, I haven't seen you in years. Like you've grown so much, right?" And you're like, "Oh wow, like I didn't. You remember we lived down the street from each other or something like that?"
Oh my God, what the heck?
Right, and just asked was like, do you have records? And I would put money on, more often than not the answer is going to be like, of course, we have the records. Like no one ever bothers to ask, but so yeah, you go on this adventure to find out. And tell them like, I heard that these guys in Guatemala like can literally just go online and look at their JPEGs, and all the JPEGs are timestamps. It seems kind of silly that Guatemala has a much more transparent and secure election system than ours. Like, do you have a backup plan? Like, do you have anything that protects it? And just find that out. We have a demo that you can find. It's also demo.simpleproof.com, so you can actually see it and show. You can show the election authority like this is what it is. Like literally, imagine here's a PDF and it's been timestamped, and you can just check it. And if you run your own node, you can show them like it's on my node. Like it's not even on their cloud. It's like on my node. And just reach out to us, right? It's like if you want more information, if you want help, if you want guidance, just send us an email, info@simpleproof.com, and go on this adventure to find out if you live in a place that has a don't verify trust philosophy on the elections, or maybe you'll be surprised and you find that there's this tradition of people. And my opinion is those people in the election, like what I discovered in Guatemala is there's a small group of really passionate people that have been protecting our voting system, and they love it. And they're basically Bitcoiners, but they don't know it, right? Like when you walk through like
Bitcoiners in spirit,
all the guarantees that they give you and everything, you realize, I mean, all the reasons you just gave me as to why you're protecting democracy and all the archives that you're doing and the chain of custody and that everything needs to be locked in, like they're Bitcoiners. They just don't know it.
You just explained why Bitcoin. You just don't realize that money is the more important thing to apply this to. Yeah.
And so then that you find neighbors that you're like, hey, we have this meetup that we get together and we talk about, these kinds of things. Maybe you want to join us, right? And so it's I've discovered that democracy is this like untapped market of pretty hardcore Bitcoiners that are keeping our right to fire the people in power, right? And just reach out to them. Don't forget your neighbors.
Hell yeah, man. I will have links to all this stuff in the show notes. If you have anything else you specifically want to send me, I have the links and stuff to the video. Of course, I think it was on digitalwitness.com, wasn't it?
It's on there as well. Yeah, the documentary Immutable Democracy, 15 minutes. It's I've heard it. People like it. I've heard it's good.
I've heard 15, it's good. I don't know.
15 minutes thing. Well, I can't ask Guy what he thinks because he hasn't watched it.
I was hoping you'd forgotten by now.
15 minutes, man.
I'll send it to you in Telegram. I'll send it to you in Telegram.
Appreciate it, dude.
Man. Thank you for coming on. It is good to chat. The next time we do this, I will be pre-prepared without all of the quite the hazardous course to arrive at our interview destination. Thank you. Thanks for coming on, man. This was a blast. Always had a blast. Always love hanging out, man.
My pleasure, man. Keep doing what you're doing. We shall win.
Of course. Later, man. What if everybody who listened to this episode just contacted their county clerk and asked? It could be an email, phone call, whatever it is. Email would be easier. You can even have ChatGPT write it up for you and just do some bullet points so it's very simple and succinct. And you just ask the county clerk, what is your plan to protect the data, to ensure the data from our local election results? Do you have insurance for proving that the election data has not been tampered with? I heard about a system that Guatemala has used that is super simple, that is crazy easy to implement, and I think you should check it out. What do you think would happen? Like, there's a number of thousands of people who will listen to this episode, what if everybody just sent the email? I'm going to make myself do this, by the way. I'm going to figure out who the hell my county clerk is. I don't know anything about local elections. And in a general sense, I don't care. Like, I don't think it's a good system, but it is the system currently. And that is a utility of that system. And more importantly, it is a touch point for someone to understand the value of an immutable record, of being able to make a stamp and make a proof of a current state of some data and become a means of showing that it is either the same data or it has been tampered with. And this is definitely an era in which that is a very, very important thing. It's something to consider. That's my call to action today. Check it out. And also the other call to action for myself in particular is that I cannot believe I have still not watched Immutable Democracy. The 16 minutes, it's 16 minutes. It's 16 minutes, man. How have I not watched it? And I did start it, which is even more embarrassing, I think. So I'm going to watch that thing, and the link will be right down in the show notes if you want to watch it. So definitely check it out. Also links to our sponsors, Swan Bitcoin and CoinKite, who make this show possible and keep me able to go down these rabbit holes and provide this information and these conversations for you. I hope you're enjoying them. Anything that you can do to support the show is actually a huge help, especially with the applications and stuff that we're investing in the background, which we're so on the edge, and I'm so excited to tell you about it, but it frustrates me because I feel like I bring it up a lot and we're still just not quite there. We're always like days away, but I do have a lot of things brewing in the background. And I'd want to say also, I haven't mentioned fountain boosts and stuff in a while. I am seeing them and I'm reading the comments. Thank you guys so, so much. God, the sats that come in are so wonderful. And they really mean the world to me. And they're a great thing between my feeling crazy and overwhelmed. And like I've, put 30 things on my to-do list and I only got 5 of those things done. And scrambling to go do something with my family and trying to put this house together and deal with the flooding issues and the drainage and stuff, which we're working on again. And all of these things, between all of these things, I'll stop and I'll just open up Fountain and I'll read the comments and I'll see somebody give me 100 sats and be like, great episode, man. I really love this conversation. Or even just point out some crap where I was wrong. That doesn't stress me out. Like I actually really, really appreciate that. And I try to correct myself whenever I do that on the show so that I'm actually giving you guys honest information and my genuine thoughts about it. But Vake, Michael, I see so many of you guys still zap and boost the show and send in a comment. And I just want to shout out to everybody, as well as the Audionauts. That makes it makes my day, and it lets me calm down, sit back, and kind of get a big picture and be like, okay, like this is not for nothing. Like I'm doing the right thing. I'm headed in the right direction. I just need to keep putting my head down and keep working. So thank you for that. That support means a lot. With that though, don't forget to check out Carlos. Don't forget to check out Immutable Democracy. Contact your county clerk. Guy, contact your county clerk. I told you you're going to do it. You're going to do it because you said it on the show, and it's recorded and it's there forever. And if you tamper with it, maybe I should start timestamp. You should timestamp this show to prove it, because I might tamper it later if I feel embarrassed. We're done. We're done. This is the longest outro ever. I love you guys. Thank you so much for listening. Links and details. You know where to find him. You're an idiot if you don't, because I say it 1,000 times. And until next time, everybody, take it easy, guys.